On the worst days, when you're tired, on the worst days, when you're tired, when you failed, when everything inside you is screaming to stop. Most people have never experienced this kind of discipline, not because they're weak, but because they've been building it the wrong way their entire lives. They treat discipline like a fuel tank, something you fill up with motivation and willpower, and when it runs out, you stop. And it always runs out. The Japanese tradition of Shugyo treats discipline like something completely different. Not a fuel, a forge, a process of deliberate hardship that doesn't just train what you do, it transforms who you are. And once you understand how it works, you'll never again wait to feel motivated to do what needs to be done. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments. What area of your life is suffering most from lack of discipline right now? That's the area where Shugyo begins. Let's go. This is the story of a man named Andre, 29 years old, intelligent, ambitious, and stuck in a loop he couldn't break. Every 3 months, Andre would have what he called a reset. He'd get inspired by a book, a video, a conversation, and completely overhaul his life. New wake-up time, new workout routine, new diet, new reading schedule, new goals written in a new notebook. The first week was always incredible. He felt transformed. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw someone becoming exceptional. By the second week, the cracks appeared. A late night here, a skipped session there. By the third week, the whole structure had collapsed. And by the fourth, Andre was back to his default, scrolling until midnight, sleeping until 8, telling himself the next reset would be different. He had cycled through this pattern 11 times in 3 years. 11 fresh starts, 11 collapses. Same person every time. Andre's problem wasn't that he lacked vision, he had too much of it. Every reset was built on inspiration, on the feeling of possibility, and the moment that feeling faded, the entire structure fell with it. He had never built discipline, he had only ever rented motivation. In Japanese martial and spiritual traditions, Shugyo is one of the most demanding concepts a practitioner can encounter. It is often translated as austere training or disciplined practice, but those translations miss the core of it. The kanji for Shugyo contains the idea of enduring hardship in order to polish the self, not training to get better at a skill, training to become a different kind of person, a person who has been tested by difficulty and has not broken. The monks who practiced Shugyo didn't train in good conditions, they trained in the worst ones, deliberately. They woke before dawn in freezing winters, they fasted while working at full capacity. They sat in meditation until the body screamed to move, not as punishment, as construction, because they understood something that Andre had never been taught. Comfort doesn't build character, resistance does. The moments when you want to stop and don't, those are the moments that lay the foundation of who you become. A psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania who has spent 20 years researching human resilience found that the individuals with the highest levels of long-term self-discipline share one trait that has nothing to do with talent or genetics. They have a history of choosing difficulty voluntarily. They have trained themselves, repeatedly and deliberately, to move toward discomfort instead of away from it. That training rewires the brain's response to resistance until what once felt like an obstacle begins to feel like a signal to proceed. Andre had spent 3 years running from resistance. Shugyo would teach him to run toward it. When Andre first encountered Shugyo, something in him resisted immediately. This sounds like suffering for the sake of suffering. What's the point of making things harder than they have to be? That question revealed everything, because it assumed that the goal of discipline is to make things easier. It's not. The goal of Shugyo is to make you bigger than the difficulty, not to remove the resistance, but to expand your capacity to meet it. There's a fundamental difference between a person who has an easy life and a person who can handle a hard one. One depends on conditions. The other carries their foundation with them wherever they go. Andre's first Shugyo practice was simple and uncomfortable by design. Wake up at 5 a.m. every day for 30 days, regardless of how he felt. No motivation required, no inspiration necessary. The alarm goes off, the feet touch the floor. That's it. The rest of the day could be whatever it needed to be. But that moment was non-negotiable. The first 3 days were fine. The fourth day, he hadn't slept well, and everything in him said not today. He got up anyway, and something small but significant happened. He proved to himself that his body's protests were not commands, that he was capable of acting in direct opposition to how he felt, that the gap between intention and action could be crossed without emotional permission. That proof was the beginning of something that motivation had never been able to build. The traditional practice of Shugyo is built on 3 laws that separate it from ordinary discipline, and from the kind of inspired but fragile routines that Andrei had been building and destroying for years. The first law is intentional difficulty. Shugyo is not about making your life harder randomly. It is about choosing one specific area of resistance and meeting it deliberately every single day. Not when you feel ready, not when conditions are ideal, especially when they aren't. Because the brain only builds the architecture of discipline when it is forced to act against the pull of comfort. And that can only happen when the difficulty is real. The second law is continuity over intensity. This is the law Andrei had violated 11 times. He always trained at maximum intensity, complete life overhauls, extreme schedules, and burned out before the behavior had time to become structural. Shugyo demands the opposite: lower intensity, unbroken continuity. A 1-hour practice sustained for a year builds more than a 10-hour practice sustained for a week. The brain doesn't respect heroism, it responds to repetition. The third law is purposeful suffering. Every difficulty in Shugyo has a declared purpose. You are not enduring discomfort randomly. You are enduring it in service of a specific transformation. Before the practice begins, you name what you are forging, what weakness you are burning away, what version of yourself you are building. This transforms suffering from something that happens to you into something you are using. And that shift in agency changes everything about how the mind handles resistance. On day 30 of his 5 a.m. practice, Andrei didn't celebrate. He simply set the alarm for day 31. That was how he knew something had changed. The old Andrei would have celebrated, rewarded himself, taken a day off. This Andrei understood that the practice wasn't a challenge to complete. It was an identity to maintain. He had become someone who gets up at 5 a.m., not because he wanted to, but because that's who he was now. Over the following months, he added layers: a cold shower after waking, 30 minutes of focused work before touching his phone, 1 hard conversation per week he'd been avoiding. Each addition followed the same law: deliberate, continuous, purposeful. His friends noticed before he did. They said he seemed different, more settled, like someone who had stopped waiting for life to give him the right conditions and had started building conditions from the inside out. What Shugyo had given Andrei wasn't a routine. It was proof, accumulated proof, built one difficult morning at a time, that he was not at the mercy of how he felt, that between the impulse to stop and the act of stopping, there was a space. And in that space, he had a choice. He had always had that choice. He had simply never trained the muscle that made it available. Discipline built on motivation collapses the moment motivation disappears. Discipline built on Shugyo doesn't need motivation at all. It is forged from something older and more reliable: the memory of every time you chose the hard thing and survived it, and came back to choose it again. If this changed the way you think about discipline, not as something you have or don't have, but as something you forge, one hard choice at a time, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Every week, content built for people who are done waiting to feel ready. And tell me in the comments, what is your first Shugyo practice? What is the one difficulty you will choose deliberately starting tomorrow? Name it. That declaration is the first act of the discipline you're building. I'll see you in the next one.